I am Erec Smith, a research fellow at the Cato Institute, and I am happy to have Bill Deresiewicz with us today. He is a former professor of English, an award-winning author, and culture critic. He is the author of Excellent Sheep, a critique of elite education, which is right up my alley, and The End of Solitude, a collection of education essays, intellectual essays, and of course, essays on solitude. Today we'll be discussing a relatively new project in his life, the Matthew Strother Center for the Examined Life. It's a mouthful, but it's a good thing. A program dedicated to deep and authentic intellectual engagement, civil living, and personal growth. Outcomes, I think, are also aligned with Civil Discourse as well. So with that, let's get going. Hello, Bill. Thank you for joining us.
Thanks for having me on, Eric. I've been looking forward to this conversation.
That's my line. I was going to say I look forward to this conversation, but
we can both look.
Okay, I look forward to this conversation. I do want to start more generally, though, and ask you about disadvantages in elite education and Excellent Sheep. Within those texts, well, one is about that text and the other has this essay within it, you critique elite institutions, right, for the enforcement of dogma and ideological consensus. How has the education sphere changed since you first published your work?
Right. So I was an English professor at Yale from 98 to 2008. And in 2008, it was a kind of a coincidence as it happened to be as I was leaving Yale and leaving academia in general. I wrote an essay for the American Scholar called The Disadvantages of an Elite Education. If I'd known that it would circulate as widely as it ended up doing, I would have thought of a better title, but at least it was a descriptive title. And it led to a lot of emails from students, very long, or recent graduates, very long, confessional, anguished often emails, and a lot of talks at a lot of colleges around the country. And that's how it ended up growing into a book that came out in 2014 called Excellent Sheep. Now, I should say that both of those texts are not really about dogmatism, progressive dogmatism as we've come to know it in the academy, which really only emerged around the time the book came out, 2014, and I only became aware of the following year when I went back and taught a semester at the Claremont Colleges in California. But they're connected to it. What they are about is what going through the system of elite education, and in particular becoming the kind of person that gets into a fancy college, turns you into. Like what person does the system produce, which is a system, as I'm sure everybody who's listening to this knows, of relentless hoop jumping, adult pleasing, risk aversion, and individualistic meritocratic competition. The kind of people that produces are conformists. They are teacher pleasers. And as I said, they're intensely competitive individuals with often a really shallow engagement with the intellectual material that's being put in front of them, if only because the system requires so much quote-unquote achievement in the form of AP courses and extracurricular activities and clubs and sports and music and student government and all that crap that you don't really have time to engage intellectually. So that's what Excellent Sheep is about, 2014. And when what we now call wokeness, what we used to call political correctness, really began to rear its head shortly thereafter, my first question was, what does this have to do with Excellent Sheep, with Excellent Sheephood? Is it a negation of my thesis? Does it mean that students have now moved on to a kind of political engagement that I hadn't seen before? So I had to think this problem through, and what I realized was, and others have said this in different ways since then, actually no. Campus protest politics is actually highly synergistic with competitive individualistic meritocracy. First of all, it provides a kind of moral fig leaf for what every student in their heart knows is just a race to get as much as they can get as fast as they can get it. And I think the best evidence of that is that since the advent of sort of campus protest politics and all of that, the postgraduate destinations of elite college students have not changed at all. The majority are still going into finance, consulting, or tech, plus some who go into law, which generally means corporate law, and maybe some who go into medicine. So nothing about their life course has changed. And then I think the other thing to say about this sort of connection between excellent sheephood and wokeness is that one of the things excellent sheephood is about, both for students and for institutions, is a kind of moral vacuum, right? Education got to the point where it wasn't about anything except careerism. And in some ways, even the institutions acknowledged that with the way they messaged what they were about. We're going to help you succeed financially. We're going to help you get a better job. And I think nobody was really comfortable with that because it sounds so shallow and materialistic, as indeed it is. So when wokeness came along, it kind of became a sort of ready-made sort of moral mission, which is how schools pivoted so quickly to being about social justice, changing the world, making the world a better place. The problem is, I think we know what the problems are. The problem is that it's highly conformist. It plugs into sort of excellent sheep conformity. And it's also anti-intellectual, right? School is not supposed to be about what to think. It's supposed to be how to think. So it's interesting. So to answer your question in brief, the whole issue of dogmatic consensus didn't exist as a salient issue when Excellent Sheep came out in 2014. But in the next 10 years, it became very clear that it was quite compatible with it. It was just a new dimension of the same problem of elite conformity.
Okay, so would you say that viewpoint diversity in the academy was already an issue before the Great Awakening that started around 2014? Would you say that?
This is what I would say. There have been books about this. Professors have always skewed towards the liberal end of the spectrum for reasons that are, I think, historical, vocational. First of all, never as much as is the case now. The numbers were not as bad. And then also their politics weren't as salient a part of what they did and how they taught. What I did see from the moment I entered graduate school in 1989 was this kind of dogmatic consensus, sort of policing. I was an English professor. I saw it in graduate school. It was already very clear by 1989 that that's where that field was, and certainly related fields in the humanities as well. The difference is that it was confined to graduate programs and sort of the immediate academic context. It didn't penetrate to undergraduates, and it certainly didn't penetrate to the society at large outside of the academy. That, I think, is the big difference. So, when I saw wokeness erupt in 2015, I'm like, oh, I saw this in 1989. I know what this is. It just hadn't, infected everybody at that point.
Yes, I can relate to that. I also saw it in graduate school, but I looked at it and said, oh, that's not going to catch on. They're just over there playing with their, toys or playing in their sandbox, as a colleague of mine once said. But that was a mistake. Right? It went underground, according to Greg Lukianoff and Ricky Chlott in their recent book, The Canceling of the American Mind. It went underground. And I and so many other people thought, well, we don't have to deal with that anymore. Boy, were we mistaken. But as you say, and it's a good point because I'm a former academic as well, there were issues before that, and they revolve around conformity, and jumping through hoops. Tenure is a prized goal among academics, and you have to toe the line if you want to make sure you get it. Now, after you get it, you can say whatever you want. Or that used to be the case. Some people are still getting fired, although they have tenure. But there have been problems all over the place regarding education, higher education in particular. Is there any way to right this ship?
Oh, man. That's a big question. I I don't like political interference from the outside. I don't think that's a smart way to do it. I don't think it's the right way to do it. I think academic freedom is essential. However, we obviously have a problem, and part of the problem is rooted in the tenure system. And it's not, I actually don't believe in the abolition of tenure for reasons we can talk about, but clearly tenure it's one of the reasons that it's very hard to change academic culture, because people can stay in place for decades. And the other reason it's hard is that the whole system is about reproducing yourself, right? You have graduate students, and you kind of shape them in your image. They select you to work with because they already want to be shaped in your image. So how do you break in and change a system like that? It's not such an easy question to answer. I mean, one thing that I do think may be promising, even if it's also driven by a party political agenda, is the creation in various states, they tend to be Republican-controlled states, of these kind of sort of new units within the university. Like there's a new college at the University of Florida, and they tend to all, and they're Ohio, I think Ohio State has one, I know UNC has one, and they tend to all be founded under the rubric of something like civics and civilization. So they're kind of a way to circumvent the departments, especially when they have their own hiring power, to kind of create an alternative college within the university. That might be the beginning of one form of a solution.
Yes, I think you're talking about institutions, all right, or institutes rather, within colleges and universities that are semi-autonomous. They're doing their own thing. Of course, they're part of the university, but they are doing their own thing. There should be some promise in that. I remember thinking that a while back, but then I remember thinking, how are we going to convince people to have something like this on every campus? And it seems like, I'm assuming here, I'm inferring from what you said, that you're hopeful about that.
Well, I mean, I'm not hopeful for it as a global solution, but I think it's one form of the beginning of a solution. I mean, I'm thinking out loud now. I mean, what is going to change this? How do you change culture, and how do you change culture in an institution that has sort of tremendous institutional inertia or institutional momentum because of things like tenure and the reproduction processes of academia? Well, I mean, I think we see this to a certain extent in other institutions now, like the media. Like they sense that the winds are changing, the vibe is shifting, and if they don't want to become obsolescent, they need to release the grip on the way they've been doing things and be open to doing things differently. You know what I'm saying? I mean, you can see this sort of in the New York Times and the kinds of things they publish and the kinds of people they publish. They recognize that they need to open up their conversation. What's also hopeful to me is that Václav Havel talked about this with Czechoslovakia. Like, everybody pretends to believe the dogma, but maybe only like 10% of people actually do, and everybody else is just kind of keeping their heads down.
Yes.
Which means that when the vibe changes, it can. This is why communism collapsed so quickly, because nobody believed in it anyway. And as soon as they saw that it was safe, everybody was like, "Yeah, no, we don't believe this." I don't think it's going to be that simple in academia, because for lots of reasons. But I think that would really be, I think, the solution, when everybody realizes, like, we can move on now.
All right.
It's safe to move on.
I do see a lot of people coming out of the woodwork saying, well, I never liked this stuff in the first place, which is kind of offensive, because, people like me and others put themselves out there, to fight this. Like, where was that sentiment in 2022 or something like that?
That's
I
right.
believe in forgiveness, but we cannot forget, what happened and who did it and things like that. I'm done with my tangent right now. Let's focus on you. You said something interesting just then. You are not into the idea of the Trump administration coming in from the outside and forcing change. I agree with that. I mean, I should. I work at the Cato Institute. But what that also says is that there was no civil discourse. The Trump administration never came out and said, here's why we're doing what we're doing. They did to a degree, but not well enough, because this is a very nuanced situation. For example, diversity, equity, and inclusion. People love those words, but those words don't quite mean what they used to in contemporary academia. They mean, at times, the complete opposite of those words. That should have been articulated, in my opinion. That way the public knows what's going on, the institutions can chime in and have a discourse about this, and we can see this being worked out in real time. I think that was an opportunity that was blown by the Trump administration, honestly, but there's still time to do this, right? There's still time to say, well, let's explain why this is problematic and why we need to get rid of it. And we should also explain why academics should be leading the way and not politicians. That said, I'm getting to my question. A lot of people, including Chris Rufo and followers of his, think academics blew it. They had their chance to right the ship, and they did not. So now it's time for the adults to come in and bring things back to a more, common and classical liberal education. What do you think about that?
It would be nice if there were some adults around to do it.
Yeah.
I mean, no, the way the Trump, there's so many things that are wrong about the way the Trump administration and/or Chris Rufo are doing this. But as is sometimes the case with Trump and the Trumpists, the diagnosis is correct, or is at least partly correct, even if the answer is wrong. And I think that, I remember thinking this, or at least in retrospect, realizing this, back in the 90s when I was in graduate school, which is all these lefty academics think that they're getting away with something, and they think they can get away with it indefinitely. They are attacking the man, they hate the man, they think the man needs to be brought down, but they want to do it, and the man means, it means Western civilization, America, patriarchy, capitalism, the nuclear family, everything they're against. And that would all be fine, except they want to do it on the man's dime and with the man's at least tacit acquiescence. It's like if you want to go into the wilderness, good for you, but you actually want a tenured position with a big salary at a fancy university, and you also want to be bomb-throwing, metaphorically bomb-throwing radicals. And they thought they could get away with this forever, and people have finally called them out about it. So as I think you just suggested, this really has to come from the universities, which means that it really needs to come from university leaders, from university presidents. Now, as I look back on the history of higher education, we've had some pretty visionary, courageous university presidents in the relatively distant past. Leaders of Harvard, leaders of Yale. There was a great president of Notre Dame whose name escapes me at the moment. I haven't seen presidents like that in a long time. I'm actually happy with the guy at Harvard now who's standing up to Trump after places like Columbia, my alma mater, completely buckled immediately. But it clearly needs to go beyond standing up to Trump, and it has to also mean standing up to your own faculty and to the way things have been conducted. Perhaps we've reached a point where things are so desperate and so dire that they will start to do that. Maybe some of them have already started to do that.
Well, let's hope. All that said, you and I both left the academy. Right? You have your reasons, I have mine, but they kind of align with the, inherent illiberalism, in the air of academia to a large degree. You're talking about conformity as well, and conformity to a particular ideology, and there's the lack of viewpoint diversity. But we decided to leave. We didn't stay and try to fix things. I left because fighting this war behind enemy lines proved a bit too arduous, and I could do more from the outside. Why did you leave?
Right, so I want to be clear about this. I did not decide to leave. I did not actually want to leave. I ended up having to leave because I never got that sort of next job after Yale, which I expected to. And the reasons, again, this was sort of before the age of dogma. Well, I mean, there was dogma within the departments. That's true, within the field. Basically, the short story is my priorities were not fully aligned with the priorities of a successful academic career. You know, you have one job as an academic, especially before you get tenure, which is to publish, publish, publish. And I felt like, I mean, I did publish a decent amount, but I also cared about other things. And the thing that I cared about the most was teaching. And you're not supposed to spend 1 second more than you have to on your teaching, especially before you get tenure. But I got into this to teach. I got into this especially to teach undergraduates, not to reproduce myself professionally, to open young minds, to help other people go through the experiences that had been so transformative for me when I was reading books in college and before college and after college. And then I also liked and believed in writing for a general audience. So I wrote, book reviews for the New York Times Book Review. It might surprise some people to learn that writing book reviews for the New York Times Book Review gets you no credit professionally, even as a professor of English, because it's not peer reviewed, it's not academic writing.
Right.
So I kind of took a gamble and thought that I could get away with it, that I could get away with doing these other things, and it didn't work out. But again, I mean, why was I so... I mean, I said that I published, and I did, but I also fundamentally thought that writing journal articles about in the field of English literature was kind of a waste of time. Because how much of a difference does it make to people, really? And also, I certainly didn't align myself with the intellectual and ideological norms that were already ascendant in my field. And people recognized that about me, and I think that's one of the reasons they were more reluctant to hire me. So the timing is a little different, but I was already at odds with the whole situation. I regretted leaving very much, because I think I'm never sure how much effect I can have on the larger world with anything that I write or anything that I can do. The one thing I am sure about is that I can change individual students' lives through teaching.
Okay.
And that's what I wanted to do, and I miss that terribly.
Yes, and I understand that. I miss it terribly too. Not enough to go back, but I do miss it. And you definitely had an influence on your students, which provides me with a good segue into the Matthew Strother Center for the Examined Life. I want to say unexamined because I hear that much more than examined life. But tell us about that as an alternative, right? An alternative place for conversation, intellectual exploration, things like that. What is it?
Yeah, thanks for asking me, and thanks for letting me talk about this. I think to set the larger scene, there's a lot, more and more kinds of endeavors that involve humanistic study outside of the academy, right? You said the word alternative, and that's what I'm responding to. All kinds of different things. The Catherine Project, which is an online thing, things for adults, maybe even alternative kinds of colleges. So what is this one, which I think even in that sphere is unique? Matthew Strother was a student of mine. He was one of my favorite students. He was tremendously vibrant and charming and talented and a true seeker, a true intellectual. And he became one of the students that I was closest to, maybe the closest. So Matthew graduated, actually we quote unquote graduated the same year in 2008. He went off to Europe. Instead of climbing one of the ladders that he could certainly have climbed as an excellent sheep, he wanted to go somewhere and think and read, went to Paris for a couple of years, went to Berlin for a couple of years. I didn't hear from him for a long time. And then 5 years in, I got the longest letter I've ever gotten. It was about 30 pages long. And it was really kind of a spiritual diary. And one of the things he talked about was that he wanted to stop just being an autodidact and wanted to re-enter a more formal academic environment. He ended up doing a Master's of Liberal Studies, which I think he enjoyed, but even that was limited.
Yeah.
He knew that one place not to live the life of the mind was a PhD program. we had this conversation probably every year for 6 years. What do I do next? Oh, PhD. And he knew already, like, if you want to be a thinker, a PhD program is not the place to do it.
Yeah.
So he started to formulate, he decided, you know what? I can't find the school that I'm looking for, so I'm going to create it myself. And he studied models. Deep Springs College was one, the Catherine Project was another, Plato's Academy was another. And he formulated a list of sort of principles or guiding ideas. Humanistic study in a retreat environment with no technology, in a community, shared labor like at Deep Springs. The program was designed to be free, so there were no barriers, and so people felt an obligation to really take it seriously. He even went so far as to buy some land in upstate New York, kind of a beautiful old farm property. And then Matthew got cancer. And he fought it for several years. Looked like he was going to be successful. And then in the end, he wasn't. And Matthew, my dear friend, died a couple of years ago. He had gotten married by that point. His wife's name is Berta. And before he died, he charged her with the fulfillment of his vision, which she very much wanted to do as a way of keeping his spirit alive. So she turned to people to help her, and one of the people she turned to was me, especially for sort of the academic aspect of it. Berta is a ferociously competent business person, and within about a year of Matthew's death, she had already created an institution exactly like what he had envisioned. So a year ago, in May of 2024, we ran our first programs. And 2 weeks from now, we're going to start this year's programs. So this is how it works. We select a small number of adult students, right? So this is post-college. That was key to Matthew's idea. Post-college students of any age, and we've had students from a wide range of ages. 5 students who come together with a teacher on this property for 7 days. Again, no technology, no phones, no Wi-Fi, and read slowly and intently one text of literature or philosophy. We plan to branch out to things like history and religious studies and scientific humanities and so forth. And live together and have long conversations, and there is a labor component and so forth. I taught last year's third of 3 sessions in October, and I can tell you that it was transformative for me, let alone for my students. And I'd be happy to sort of expand and talk about this more.
I would love for you to do so, but first of all, I want to say sorry for your loss. Matthew sounds like an amazing person. And he also sounds like, he exercised his First Amendment right to free association and took care of things on his own, right? We can be self-reliant when we want to be. It's easier for some than others, but we can do it. It's something that shows us the agency we have as Americans to take it upon ourselves to fix something that we see as broken. So I admire him for that. I wish you were here so that I could interview him as well. You're a great interviewee, but I would love to talk to somebody like that. But I just wanted to say that, I'm very impressed by who he was and what he did. But I would love for you to elaborate on how it changed you.
First of all, I just felt like after the week, I like 5 years had been added to my life. It was so invigorating. It was so re-energizing to go back to this. I hadn't taught for a long time, but I feel like even if I had been teaching college, I would still feel the same way, because there was a kind of purity to it. Meaning, and this is sort of part of the idea, it's not for the sake of anything beyond itself. There's no utilitarian aspect to it.
Yes.
Right? It's not to get grades, credentials, degrees. It's not even to sort of the way like some artist residencies, they expect you to produce something, which is not bad in that context, but in this context, it's like the purpose of the experience was to have the experience. And the intensity of the relationships that we built, even in this very short period, I mean, the only thing I can compare to, I'm not sure everybody has had this kind of experience, but I think some people have. I was a camp kid, and summer camp was an incredibly important, powerful experience for me when I was a teenager. This was like that. It was like an ideal combination of summer camp and the intensity of the relationships and the depth of the connections and literature seminar, because it was also this high-level intellectual activity.
Excellent. That's great. And you were a camp kid, you say? Very nice.
Yeah.
I wanted to go to camp the first time I saw the movie Meatballs. And I don't know if that's a good reason to go to camp, but that's what I got out of that movie. So that's great. I want to go to the audience, the online audience, for some questions. And let's see if we can answer them. A person by the name of Anonymous, that's a good American name, asked this: Bill, are you doing a sequel to Excellent Sheep?
No, I have continued to write about these issues, about higher education. So I've continued, my further thoughts along the same lines are ongoing. I wrote a number of pieces about wokeness in academia. There was a piece for the Chronicle of Higher Education that they asked me to write this post-election. They said, have the politics of the academy now been defeated? And my short answer was yes, and my longer answer was the piece. And you could look that up. Yeah.
Okay. Speaking of the academy, Anonymous has another question. Any chance we can get you back into academia?
Well, this is a good question. I never thought anybody would offer me an academic job because, once you're out, you're out. And I hesitate to say this because now people are going to be wanting me to do this. But in the last couple of years, I actually was offered a couple of jobs. And one of them is at that University of Florida thing. It wouldn't be a regular academic appointment. And I'm in the middle of writing a book with a deadline. But I am at least considering it, possibly maybe one semester a year.
Okay.
We'll have to see. I mean, as you know, Eric, it's hard, it takes a lot of work to be an academic. And
yes.
One thing I like about not being an academic anymore is that I can just sit on my ass and write and not have to grade papers and go to committee meetings. So we'll see.
Yeah. I work at a think tank, which to me is college without the students. So, I mean, if you want to look at it that way. That said, I do miss my students and my former students. If you're watching, I had a great time with you, right? Just FYI. Okay. That seems to be the only question or questions we have here, which is good and bad. No, it's just good. We can continue our own Q&A, right? And do it that way. Let's talk about civil discourse and how the Strother Center kind of reflects that, maybe even exemplifies that. Are there difficult conversations being had? If so, how are they had? Are there actually rules of engagement that you have? I would love to know that.
So the answer is, at least in the program that I ran, it wasn't like that. And one thing that I like to talk about in general is that sometimes when given the choice between two alternatives, like having a civil argument, political debate, or having an uncivil one, we should always bear in mind that there are other alternatives beyond those two. So we didn't talk about politics there, maybe partly because I was a lit guy, so we read Portrait of the Artist. It wasn't a text that particularly lent itself to political argument, although it could have. But there were also many other hours in the day. I think we were all happy. We never said this out loud, but I think one of the great things was that we were all happy to just leave all of that behind. You know, I mean, sometimes we have political arguments because we care about issues and we want to advance our beliefs or figure things out. But I think a lot of it is just at this point, this kind of compulsive uh, exercise, purgation of emotions, positive, negative, and just to get away from that whole sort of cortisol dopamine cycle of denunciation. And I think we just wanted to do that. So I can't say that this was a model of civil discourse in the exact way that you're talking about,
Right.
but I do think that it might have been a model for the kinds of conditions that can create civil discourse. Because, I mean, we talked about the novel.
Yes.
And outside of the seminar, the 3-hour-a-day seminar, we talked about a lot of other things. And we certainly didn't agree about everything. But we weren't sitting around having debates. We were sitting around having conversations, which means they're open-ended. They are about exploration and learning from each other. And I think most importantly, we were in an environment where we were connected to each other in a genuine way, where we were responsible to each other, where we were all, instead of sort of each being on our laptops or our phones in different places, just shouting across the electronic transom, we were in a community, in an environment that we all had to inhabit together. So we needed to be respectful to each other because, it's like don't shit where you eat, right? Like we're gonna be there, we're gonna stay there. So you have to, right? I guess what I'm saying, and I'm kind of thinking out loud a little bit, is I think maybe part of the breakdown of civil dialogue is related to the breakdown of community. Like if you're not really connected to other people, there are no limits on how you treat them. There's no need to be responsible to maintaining a relationship with them.
Right. Yeah, it seems like civil discourse is downstream from having a healthy community in which you can have that discourse. It seems a community that values what you just said, exploration and learning. Right? When I think of civil discourse, I think of those things. We're exploring ideas together. We're learning inadvertently sometimes by just hearing things we haven't heard before. It's a wonderful thing. Sadly, that happens a lot less in the places where it's supposed to happen, like institutes of education. So I have to ask, how can people be involved with this center? Not just participants, but also teachers or moderators or something like that.
Right. So first of all, please, if you're interested, go to the website, Matthew Strother Center for the Examined Life. Sign up for our newsletter so you'll be part of the conversation. It'll be part of the mix. We open applications for all of a given year's programs sort of in December, and we do the admissions that way. We are also hoping, it's still early days, but we're hoping to expand to other kinds of events, say, sort of one-day events or, one afternoon events in various cities. This is all still taking shape. I would be remiss if I didn't say we're always fundraising. The program is free. We are grateful for any support that we can get. And if people are interested in teaching in this program, they should contact us. One of the, we're just starting our programs. The teacher for the first program this year is the great Becca Rothfeld, one of the great, literary thinkers of her generation. She's in her 30s. She writes for the Washington Post. The second program is a guy, he was a walk-in. He's actually a doctor. It's going to be a medical humanities program. He came to us. So by all means, if people are interested in that side of it, we're part of the idea is that we never want anything to get set in stone. I mean, one aspect of Matthew's spirit is that it was relentlessly experimental. So we're always looking for new ways to kind of get at the things that we're trying to uphold and value and promote.
Excellent. Well, don't be surprised if I contact you and ask
Okay.
to be a part of this. It sounds
Okay.
right up my alley. I think we can start to wrap up. Is there anything you want the audience to know about what's going on with you, your work, whatever?
Oh gosh. I'm writing a book about being Jewish in America. I'm writing a memoir about being Jewish in America. I grew up as an Orthodox Jew, modern Orthodox, not the black hats and the side curls, in suburban New Jersey. I was in a progressive Zionist youth movement in my youth. That's what I meant when I said I was a camp kid. This was a formative experience for me. This book involves a lot of wrestling with the past, with what's going on in Israel now, with what identity means, with what idealism means. And I have a little Substack that I don't write for the Substack, but I post what I write elsewhere on the Substack. I always like to hear from people. I especially like to hear from college students, but not only. Yeah. I just want to go back and underscore something. I know you said it and I said it, but I think it's just so important when we're talking about civil discourse. I mean, I prefer respectful debate to disrespectful debate, but I really actually don't like debate at all. I feel like the whole mindset of debate where you're on one side and the other person's on the other and you're in your trenches and you're firing at each other and the goal is to sort of beat the other guy is just incredibly limiting. And we should really be thinking about, conversations that are open-minded and open-ended and where you go in hoping to learn something.
Yes, formal debate is not ideal for all situations, right?
Yeah, I mean, I
or
suppose
any situations?
What?
Or any situations?
Well, I mean, I don't want to say any situations because I imagine there's some where, but I don't know. I mean, what do you think?
What do I think? I think there's a
Do you
time and
think
place for
the
everything.
formal debate is useful? Sorry, go ahead.
I think there's a time and place for everything. It depends on the topic, on the people talking, things like that. If we're looking for understanding and to try to build a community of, like-minded people, and by like-minded I mean people who appreciate conversation and things like that, then, what's going on at your center is much more ideal, than a formal debate, right? And, to your point, I think your way of doing things is a little more necessary these days than a formal debate. And I also think the book that you're currently writing is going to fly off the shelves because this is a time where people need to read books like that. So I'm glad you're working on it. I'm looking forward to seeing it again. And if you're watching, please look out for that book as well. Also, if you're watching, thanks for tuning in today. Thank you, Bill, for coming and talking to me. And I did thank the audience again, but I also want to thank Bob Maranto, formerly known as Anonymous from a few minutes ago. He gave his name, and I appreciate that. Thank you very much, Bob. So that's it. Again, I'm Erec Smith. This is Competencies in Civil Discourse. If you're curious about some tenets or concepts about rhetoric or civil discourse, you can go to www.mutualpersuasion.com. It is on the Competencies in Civil Discourse website. Please check it out. Maybe you'll learn something. That's all for me. Please have a great day.